KLIF.com.
Here's the latest from ABC News. I'm Dave Packer. President Obama getting a first-hand look at the devastation in Moore, Oklahoma. He stopped at the rubble that was the Plower Towers Elementary School, telling tornado victims they have the support of all Americans.
Obviously, the damage here is pretty hard to comprehend. Our hearts go out to the families who've been impacted, including those who've had loved ones who were lost. And that was true for the parents of some of the children here at Plaza Towers Elementary School.
The president saying more relief funding is on the way. FEMA's already provided $57 million in rebates and incentives to help build about 12,000 storm shelters in Oklahoma. In Ethiopia, the winner of the Boston Marathon has handed his medal to Secretary of State John Kerry and said it should go back to Boston in honor of the bombing victims. Kerry thanking the winner.
In a gesture of solidarity, these runners have come here today to pay their respect to Boston, to the injured, to the marathon itself.
While in the African nation, Kerry also defended U.S. anti-terrorism policies. Rutgers University was hoping a new athletic director would lead the school away from the memory of its former basketball coach who was caught on video verbally and physically abusing players. But now, New Jersey Star-Ledger reporter Craig Wolf has found that the new director, Julie Herman, was not exactly mild-mannered in her coaching style either.
Constant yelling and screaming and sort of this overall out-of-control coach. That's the picture that they're painting.
Herman coached in the late 90s at the University of Tennessee. A 62-year-old skydiver died this weekend after plummeting into a Southern California backyard. A group of skydivers trying a multi-person maneuver over Riverside County when one of them became entangled in the parachute. The man was unable to free himself and fell to the ground. This is ABC News.
Aid is fishing on a lake and just realized his car insurance bill is due. Should he A, water ski behind a pair of rainbow trout to the nearest post office, or B, pay his bill from Geico's mobile app? The correct answer is B. Paying your bill on Geico's mobile app takes only seconds. A pair of rainbow trout couldn't tow a full-grown man for more than a couple yards. The Geico mobile app is fast, free, and easier to navigate than a couple of fish.
Geico. Wherever, whenever. Just a click away with our free mobile app.
It's Macy's Memorial Day mattress sale. Take an extra 10% off already reduced mattresses from Sealy, Serta, Beautyrest, iComfort, Stearns & Foster, and more. Get a Sertapedic Firm Queen set for $269 after 10% off. Or a Sealy Posturepedic Firm Queen set for $395 after 10% off. Shop our stores, go to Macys.com, or call 1-800-MACY-BED. Macy's Memorial Day mattress sale. Exclusions apply. See store for details.
If you've got a proven record in achieving sales budgets, can develop new business, and can recruit, train, and manage a staff of sellers, Cumulus Radio Dallas has a Texas-sized opportunity for you. We need a general sales manager for our Heritage Country station, New Country 96.3 KSCS. If you can develop client relationships, manage inventory, and have at least 2 to 3 years as a media sales manager, email your resume and salary requirements to dan.bennett@cumulus.com. Full job posting at dfwradio.com. Cumulus DFW, a drug-free workplace, equal opportunity employer. Applicants must be eligible to work in the U.S.
It can begin with an email, a phone call, a flyer in the mail, or perhaps a misleading website. Loan modification scams. They come in all shapes and sizes and under different names. Loan rescue firms, counseling services, mortgage consultants, sometimes posing as a legitimate mortgage company willing to help you modify your loan and get caught up with your payments. But beware, these are highly trained con artists looking to steal your home. They often know who you are, where you live, and because it's public record, know if you are on the brink of foreclosure. You're not alone, however. The National Crime Prevention Council and U.S. Department of Justice have partnered to help homeowners identify and steer clear of these scam artists.
McGruff the Crime Dog here. Protect your home and safeguard your finances. It only takes a little time to become informed. Start by finding a free legitimate housing counselor today.
Take the first step. Visit www.ncpc.org/mortgage-fraud. That's ncpc.org/mortgage-fraud. This message is from the National Crime Prevention Council and U.S. Department of Justice.
KLIF News and Information in the afternoon
with Kurt Gilchrist.
We will be off on Monday, but back Tuesday. Hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend. U.S. Supreme Court took some big cases this session. We expect to hear some decisions on some of those soon. Gay marriage, affirmative action, voting rights. We'll break down what they have to say. Plus, we'll have traffic and weather on the 5s.
News and information in the afternoon, 3 till 8.
News and information, 570 AM, 96.3 FM, HD2.
KLIF.
Let freedom ring. You're listening to The Curtis Report on 570 KLIF.
I say to you today, my friends, let freedom ring.
The newest voice for the conservative American. It's about faith. It's about family. It's about freedom.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Barry Curtis and The Curtis Report starts now.
Thanks and welcome back to the Curtis Report on another Sunday edition. This edition, this Sunday, the entire hour will be devoted to one special guest on this special edition of the Curtis Report. Does God exist? The entire hour will be devoted to that question. We've had a 3-part series so far conducted by Professor Scott Horrell, Dallas Theological Seminary, on that subject. Does God exist? There has been on Facebook and emails and text messages a myriad of questions and comments about that subject matter. Really a fascinating topic, fascinating discussion, and it has really introduced a new level of consciousness, I think, to the Curtis Report and its listeners. This week we will dispense with all things politics and simply talk about, does God exist? It is a pleasure and really an honor and a privilege to introduce to you today our special guest, Scott Horrell, professor of theology at Dallas Theological Seminary. Professor Horrell, welcome to the Curtis Report.
Thank you, Barry. I really thank you for opening your show this way, because most talk shows are about sports or current events, and those are all important, but the big why behind them is often lacking. And this, talking about does God exist and some of the major questions of life, is what gives meaning to everything else.
Well, let's jump right in. Professor Horrell, does God exist?
Well, you have to ask, what do you mean by God? Somebody said that the word D-O-G is far more meaningful and defined than G-O-D. So who's God? Is God a personal creator who's made everything out of nothing? Or is God kind of this force out of which everything emanates? That's called pantheism. So everybody's God, everything is God. And even the atheist has to say, well, what kind of God am I rejecting if I don't believe?
Yeah, and I guess to follow up with that is, why does anything exist?
Yeah, that is the biggest question of all. And we've talked about that a little bit on the other shows too, haven't we, Barry? I think when it's all said and done, that's the sublime physics question, as well as philosophy and religion. And there are really only 3 answers pretty much given anywhere. And it divides, by the way, the world in terms of religions and philosophies. And one of those is atheism. Of course, God doesn't exist, so everything has come into existence out of chance and time and space, but there's no Mother Nature guiding this. It is an absolutely empty universe.
Atheism. Let me ask you, is atheism a religion?
Well, in a way it is, because it's a disbelief rather than a belief. Some try to say it's the neutral position and therefore the safe position, but some, like Anthony Flew, a well-known philosopher, atheist for decades, defender of that, has since come around and said, the likelihood of this universe just happening now is so astonishingly, infinitely small that it's not the neutral position. Indeed, some kind of intelligent design is.
And you were on your road to discussing why does anything at all exist? You talked about atheism a little bit, pantheism.
Well, pantheism's been around in the East and the West. You could go way back to ancient Hinduism, that all things are an emanation of God. God's the great Brahma, or some kind of force. Buddhism spins out of that. Taoism is loosely related. In the West, Plato, Spinoza, Hegel, Whitehead, comes out of both sides, but the basic belief is that everything is God, or God is everything, or there's kind of a cosmic force, or whether it's, again, just sort of everything is sort of divine, and therefore we accept it at that. So New Age and some of those groups very fit in there with pantheism. And if we were to divide up the world in big chunks, atheism or the non-religious, it would be a pretty small group, less than 2% today, but the non-religious around 11%. Pantheism in the broadest probably offensively generalistic sense, might actually reach a quarter of the world's population. But then the third option is theism, which would be Judaism, Christianity, Islam. That would be about 55% of the world population today.
And that theism means that something was created out of nothing.
Yes.
That there was divine intervention, that a creator created all of this, and it wasn't an accident.
Yeah, atheist has to say that something has always somehow existed, whether primal energy, something before the Big Bang. It's really a rather difficult position to hold, finally. But a theist says, no, there is a personal, infinite God who spoke, who out of nothing created. And so something came into existence that's not God. The tree, the rock, the cow, that's not God. God sustains it. It's there, but God is separate from his creation.
You said created something out of nothing. What does that mean exactly, out of nothing?
Well, that there was nothing, in a sense, that was not God. God was everything. As a Christian, I would say God was Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So there's a unity to a divine, tripersonal God, where there's fellowship, glory, love, communication between each from infinity past. So when God spoke, out of absolute nothing, something came into being.
The different types of religion, or less there, or lack thereof, are they at odds with one another? Are those forces, atheism, pantheism, theism, are they naturally at odds with one another?
Well, they are, in the sense that when you start to ask the other major questions of life, why do I exist? Why does humanity exist? What's the basis for human dignity? What's the basis for human personality? Why do I think? Why do I contemplate the universe? Why do I have these emotions, this conscience that says something about right and wrong? All of these questions come flowing into how you answer that really big question of why is there something instead of nothing. So in a fundamental sense, answering that first question, although very few people stop to ask it, in a sense answers all the other major questions of life, at least to some degree.
Now, on these different types of religion or non-religion, atheism, pantheism, theism, if you were to break these down by culture, by ethnicity, what does that look like, and what would that mean?
Well, it's a good question, because I'll start with atheism, which is the most current, but that does go back. Believe it or not, the Bible's the first written book in history that speaks of atheism. It's not very flattering. It says the fool doesn't believe in God. But there are Hindus that rejected the state gods, or Socrates, who did in the Greek history hundreds of years before Christ. But atheism proper really is a fairly Western phenomena, with one exception that I'll get to. Comes around with a man named Feuerbach, who said that, no, God is just a projection of ourselves to the infinite. And then others like Friedrich Nietzsche. And into the 20th century flows this very strong force of getting rid of a kind of deistic God, a God who's sovereign, getting rid of this one so that I am really free, was the great cry of the later Enlightenment. So modernism is a Western phenomenon primarily, and a rejection of this God. There has just been a book published in the last 2 months, and that by two professors at the University of North Texas. There is no God, and it is a kind of overview of atheism in America today. One of the interesting things they found is, of the 1 to 4% in the United States who would say they are atheists, that they are in great part highly educated, older, white men. And so they are rejecting God.
What does that mean? I mean, that's interesting. When you start looking at the culture and ethnicity of it, so when you look at the face of atheism, then it's much likely to be male and white?
That's what this survey of 1,500 who call themselves atheists, and personal surveys, long interviews with at least 50, that's what the interview responded. Yes.
It's interesting to know that. So for example, the Jewish community, African American community, it is much more likely to be religious in the sense that it has a creator or believes in the creator greater than themselves. Atheism is less likely to happen then in Jewish communities?
Well, I wouldn't say Jewish. I think probably as a race, the Jewish race is the most atheistic of all on earth today because of the Holocaust and the great question of how could this have happened? How can God be there? So between the Jewish and other Caucasian Western groups, atheism has been strong, especially in the 20th century, Barry. In 1980, about 22% by world census, 22% of the world claimed in some sense to be atheist. That has dropped to less than 2% today. Now, you had the Soviet Union, you had China, many other countries which are swinging back toward religious beliefs. But so atheism has taken some hard hits in spite of the loud voices today.
Fascinating. We again are speaking here in the Curtis Report with Professor Scott Horrell, Dallas Theological Seminary. And we're going to be back on the Curtis Report here in just a moment. And we're going to ask the question, why do I exist? When we return in a moment.
Do you or a family member have an alcohol or drug problem? Well, there is a solution. Solutions Outpatient Services was established 18 years ago as an alcohol and drug abuse intensive outpatient treatment program. It was founded on the belief that addiction is a disease, and because it's a disease, it can be treated. Solutions Outpatient provides their clients with an inpatient treatment process on an outpatient basis at a much lower cost and with many more benefits. Solutions Outpatient provides care that allows clients to get the treatment they need while facing the very stressors they have to learn to cope with, while providing a safe and healing environment for both clients and their families, so they can recover first from their addictions and equip themselves with the tools to maintain a lasting and comfortable recovery. There is a solution to alcohol and drug problems. Solutions Outpatient Services. Visit them online at sosdallas.com. That's sosdallas.com.
You may have noticed doctors and nurses using the Exergen temporal scanner thermometer in hospitals and clinics. That's because it gives a fast, accurate reading with just a gentle forehead scan, backed by more than 40 published medical studies. It's a huge time saver, which makes it a great money saver too. Now, what you may not have noticed is that doctors and nurses use the Exergen temporal scanner thermometer at home, too, for all the same reasons. So why not get one for your home? Pick one up today at Target and other fine retailers.
Performance Bicycle, the nation's largest cycling retailer, has created the largest sales event in their 31-year history. Now through Memorial Day, it's Performance Bicycle's Everything's on Sale event. Every road, mountain, neighborhood, and kids bike, every helmet, jersey, short, shoe, part, and accessory, all on sale. Everything. Over 3,000 items at every location reduced for this limited time event. Plus doorbusters, up to 70% off. Performance Bicycle's Everything's on Sale event runs through Memorial Day. Don't miss it. Go to performancebike.com for locations.
The Black Frame Studio in Joshua, Texas invites you to come in and take a look around. Owner and founder Joy Sanchez serves as both photographer and hairstylist. Plus, she's owned portrait studios and hair salons in various locations in Texas for years. Joy's photographic work consists mostly of fine art, abstract images, and portraiture. But don't be shy. Take a look online at joysanchezphotography.com. Contact the Black Frame Studio and Joy will help you wrap your brain around what kind of image you're looking for. The Black Frame Studio's been specializing in conceptual and fine art portrait sessions since it opened. But since then, she's also branched out and worked on commercial photography, features, and short films. The Black Frame Studio is in Joshua, Texas, but you can take a look online at joysanchezphotography.com. Joy Sanchez has the unique and perfect images you've always wanted. The Black Frame Studio, photography and hairstyling for all. Check it out online at joysanchezphotography.com.
We are talking about American exceptionalism. Get involved with the conversation. Call in with your questions at 888-787-KLIF. It's about family, faith, and freedom. Now, let's get back to the Curtis Report with our host, Barry Curtis.
Thanks, and welcome back to the Curtis Report. We're having an absolutely fascinating discussion. This Sunday's entire hour is devoted to the question, does God exist? In studio with us this week for the entire hour is Professor Scott Horrell, and he's a professor of theology at Dallas Theological Seminary, and he's with us, and he'll be with us the entire hour. Professor Horrell has got a bio and a photo online at thecurtisinitiative.com. Again, that's www.thecurtisinitiative.com. Check that out. He has got a fascinating history, which we'll explore a little bit. But I think you'll enjoy a lot about what you read about Professor Horrell. Professor Horrell, why do I exist?
Well, big question that everybody asks. And again, when you go back to the big question of why does anything exist, why does something exist instead of nothing, how you answer that as an atheist, there is no God, and so everything exists by pure chance. Or God is everything, or there's a personal God who created the universe. If you're an atheist, you'll say, well, it's a roll of the dice. In fact, about a trillion rolls of the dice that we are here, but there's no final meaning beyond what we make of ourselves. As Schopenhauer said, I make myself. The stress of modernism and postmodernism is, in some sense, to try to form meaning of our lives.
I wonder, Professor, to the average person, is it, quote unquote, easier to live your life knowing that everything happens by chance, or is it easier to live your life knowing that there is divine intervention in our lives?
Well, pretty clearly, Barry, you know where I'm going to come down on that.
Right.
But as a theist, to say that there's a personal God who's created me in his image and has revealed himself to me, and I don't have all the answers to life, but I can trust one who has made me and brought me into relationship with him. That gives density. That gives dynamic to all of life.
What does that term mean? You hear it so often, that I am created in God's image.
Lots of answers there, but when we look at the Bible, for example, we see that God thinks, God wills. This is the Father. The Father has emotions. He's the Father who welcomes the prodigal son coming back and is rejoicing, and Jesus uses that as an analogy of those who put their faith in him. You see the Son does the same. There's thinking, willing, there's the emotions. You see the Spirit even. Some people treat the Spirit more as some kind of a cosmic force, but the Spirit teaches and guides, and we can insult the Spirit. We can quench the Spirit in different ways. So the Spirit also, we see this dynamic of each member of the Godhead being truly personal. So when I struggle to know who am I, and I really struggled with that, Barry. There were times where I flew once when I dropped into a black hole, when I finally realized it's by looking up rather than within that I discover what I am as a human being, as Scott. That's what began to recreate my life, coming back into relationship with God. So that means everything for the one who says God is truly personal and has created us in his image. And it goes beyond that. We have a sense of eternity. We love to create. We want to dominate. So I teach in a graduate program called master's programs and doctoral programs. People reflect these moral motions, these emotions, these desires for friendship and relationship, and all of that, in a Trinitarian sense, is reflective of who God is.
When I look in the mirror, Professor, do I see a reflection or do I see an image? And what does that tell me in my relationship with God? Using that term, I am created in God's image. What do I see in the mirror? Can I deduce, if I'm seeing an image in the mirror, that God looks like me?
Well, God is spirit. He's the infinite spirit. And so in that sense, he's far, far beyond us. If God became man, as the Son of God became man,
and he looked like us,
then he did.
Not?
Yeah. Kind of right there at the crossroads of Africa, Asia, and Europe. So there is a sense in which he has assumed a human nature. In that sense, he does look like us. But let's say also, we are created in his image as diverse as we are. There's unity and diversity in God himself. If we're talking Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So it shouldn't surprise us that there's unity and diversity in the human race. And that's beautiful. And that's somehow reflective of who God is. But of course, God stands beyond gender, beyond color, beyond age. because he's infinite spirit at the same time. So when I say that we are created in God's image, that means we're created inwardly as persons, as God is. Finite, he's infinite, but made to relate to others as he relates to us.
So in a visual sense, because God is spiritual, we don't know what God looks like. And here's where I'm going with this. If we don't know what God looks like, then obviously that's purposeful, because we should not be godlike in that sense. We are servants. So is it built? It's just built into our relationship with God that we don't know what God looks like and should not know, because we don't. We should not be godlike.
It's interesting. There's hardly any images, even of Jesus Christ, till the 4th century. He doesn't seem to be a very physically attractive kind of guy, and maybe that's with design. Of course, no one's seen God. God's the invisible God. And so, yeah, that keeps us humble. That keeps us seeking God in an inward way rather than setting up statues and idols and all the rest.
And this is a question I actually get quite often on the internet. And we've got a couple of these questions. How would Jesus probably have looked?
Well, we don't know, but Isaiah 52:53 talks about how he really wasn't a nice-looking man. In fact, he wasn't physically attractive at all. Or he's born of a virgin, suspect circumstances, of course. As a little baby in Bethlehem, then the family fled to Egypt, so he was an immigrant because of political reasons. Finally, they came back into Nazareth. Joseph likely died when he was young, so as I think the oldest child in the family of at least 6, he was the one leading the family in some ways, along with, of course, Mary. So what did he look like? We don't know. That we know he identified with us in our poverty and simplicity. He surely did.
We know what Middle Eastern people look like. Would that have possibly been what Jesus looked like?
Well, yes, he was Jewish. No way around that one. But what he looked like in that sense, no scholar would dare say.
Right. Professor, because we are human, is pain simply a built-in inevitability of life?
Pain. By pain, do you mean physical pain or suffering, or do you mean both?
Both.
Well, the scriptures tell us, if we are Jewish or even Muslim in this sense, but certainly Christian, that God created a perfect world, but that now the world's broken. Particularly the Judeo-Christian understanding is that because of our rebellion against God, things were broken. And so pain entered into our lives. And whether pain because we're ostracized from God or we're broken in ourselves, our minds want to do one thing and our emotions go another way, and we have all these schizophrenias and traumas within us. The physical pain of life, the thorns that came into our existence, the sweat of our brow by which now we live, the divisions between humanity. I mean, you think of Adam blaming Eve for the fall, but right after that you have Abel being killed by his older brother, the firstborn of the human race, Cain. You see dissension, war, brokenness enter in. And so pain has multiplied. It has been an avalanche that flows down to us today, doesn't it?
Yeah. So much of perhaps the world's conflicts or problems can be reduced to personality. Why do I have a personality?
Well, our personhood, as I say, in a basic sense, I think goes directly back to being created in God's image. We have personalities then that are formed, of course, by culture, by family, by race, by education, by language. I mean, there's a myriad of things that form each of us uniquely as we seek to relate to one another in I-thou relationships. Our personalities then come from many, many different sides. If you are a theist, you're saying that. If you are a pantheist, let's go back to that category for a moment and say that God is everything, and so I am God. But in almost all pantheism, as Advaita Hinduism or even in Taoism, Buddhism, though Buddhism would say it's atheistic, but yet you try to transcend yourself, your own outward personality, in Sanskrit, the jiva, that's your illusion, that's your maya, that's your misunderstanding of life. In fact, you need to understand the God within you and transcend your humanness and your distinct personality to enter into oneness with the whole universe. And so pantheism goes a very different way. Your personality, your humanness, gets in the way of your final illumination. With an atheist, they would say, well, there's sociological factors and there's genetic factors, but finally, that's all there is. A number of the atheists, neuroscientists especially, are saying, all you are is a bundle of nerves, neurons, and genomes. You think you have free will, but you do not.
Speaking with the Professor Scott Horrell, does God exist? When the Curtis Report returns, what is evil? When we return in a moment.
The concept at Mercy Wine Bar is simple. Offer guests a great wine by the glass without having to purchase the entire bottle. Allow them to experiment with wines from other countries they haven't tried before and create an experience around wine in a warm, cozy, and sexy setting. 10 years in, Mercy Wine Bar is receiving awards both locally and nationally. Awards from Wine Spectator for 8 consecutive years. Named the #1 wine bar in America by Nightclub and Bar Magazine. Best place to sip wine by Addison Corridor Magazine, and awarded Best Wine Bar in Dallas by D Magazine. Today, their vision remains the same. Share an experience with their guests around food and wine. Try new things, revisit with old friends, and experience 100 different wines by the glass and 50 by the bottle from 12 countries. Mercy Wine Bar is located at the southeast corner of Beltline in the Tollway, or online at mercywinebar.com. Mercy Wine Bar, tranquility by the glass. mercywinebar.com.
1-800-222-1222. 1-800-222-1222. If you think it might be poison, then the first thing you should do is call 1-800-222-1222. Poison can be anything you're not supposed to take. Antifreeze, pesticide, the wrong drug by mistake. If you breathed a nasty chemical, been bitten by a snake, call the Poison Control Center hotline. We're here for you night or day.
For a poison or drug emergency at home or at work, just call the Poison Control Center hotline. We're here 24/7 with the expert help you need. Free and confidential. Even if you think it's a false alarm, call
1-800-222-1222. 1-800-222-1222. If you think it might be poison and you don't know what to do, call 1-800-222-1222.
Get involved with an organization with a greater purpose. The Curtis Initiative is a politically conservative think tank promoting family, faith, and freedom, which stand firmly behind the core belief of American exceptionalism. The Curtis Initiative promotes and supports some of the cornerstones of the American experience: freedom of expression, freedom of religion, staunchly defending the Second Amendment, protecting the sanctity of marriage, standing firmly behind their pro-life beliefs, and preserving vital parts of our environment. Find out more information online at thecurtisinitiative.com. The Curtis Initiative is involved with faith-based institutions in the community, promoting the American entrepreneurial spirit by both sponsoring young entrepreneurship programs highlighting local youth and by helping to privately fund scholarships for our leaders of tomorrow. And to educate even more, the Curtis Initiative Speaker Series follows political and faith-inspired speakers. The Curtis Initiative is not a political organization, but a grassroots community effort. Get involved today at thecurtisinitiative.com. That's thecurtisinitiative.com.
We are talking about American exceptionalism. Get involved with the conversation. Call in with your questions at 888-787-KLIF. It's about family, faith, and freedom. Now, let's get back to the Curtis Report with our host, Barry Curtis.
Welcome back to the Curtis Report. Hopefully you're following us online at www.thecurtisinitiative.com. Our full hour this Sunday is devoted to the question, does God exist? We're in studio with our special guest, Professor Scott Horrell of the Dallas Theological Seminary. Again, talking about the subject, does God exist? Professor, why is there evil in the world?
One of the toughest questions any philosopher or religion can try to answer, Barry. Thanks for asking that, because you are asking the big questions. And in one sense, as G.K. Chesterton said, how do you know something's evil? You you have to presuppose something straight to know that something's evil. Where does that come from? In philosophy, there's usually two divisions or categories of evil. One is natural evil, like the tornadoes that we are suffering right now, and the other is moral evil. And in a way, those go somewhat different directions. Speaking as a Christian, the Bible really doesn't quite tell us why evil exists. You might remember the book of Job, and Job is plastered with all these horrific things happening to him, and he keeps crying out to God, and God shows his strength and power, and Job says, I believe, but God doesn't give him an answer. Habakkuk, the same thing. And when we come to Jesus in the Gospels, we see people coming up and saying, well, did you hear about Pilate who sacrificed Galileans with the blood of their own sacrifices? He slaughtered them. What do you do with that? And Jesus said, do you think they're any more, and this is Jesus's word, sinful than anyone else in Galilee? Not at all, I tell you. We're all in the same boat. And then he said, and that tower in Jerusalem that fell down and killed 18. Do you think they're any worse than anyone else? Not at all. Now, notice that's moral evil. Here's Pilate, the Roman prefect of Israel at that point, or Palestine, slaughtering human beings on the one side, and on the other, a tower randomly falling and killing a bunch of people. And Jesus said he didn't give us an answer on that, but he did give us an example. I think that's really, really important here. In fact, God himself, Jesus as the eternal Son of God, came in to assume our suffering. He didn't, like the Buddha, say that suffering is a result of desire, so stop all your human desires. Rather, he entered in fully as a human being with the full-fledged desires that we have, barring sin, but of our human lives. And so we see the give and take and his anger and his joy and his loving children and all of this. We see him enter into humanity and our suffering, all the more at the Garden of Gethsemane when he prays, Father, may this cup be passed from me, and yet not my will but thine. And he entered into that horrific torture we saw in that film of Mel Gibson's, The Passion, and then the cross. He entered into the dregs of the suffering of human life. And so he gave us an example, Barry. Let me just wrap that up. He gave us an example, and he said, therefore, by his example, you reach out to those who are hurting. You reach out to those who are in pain, the suffering, the leper, the one who's born blind, and all the rest. And yet you also announce the good news of the final reconciliation with God. You do speak forth also the gospel. There isn't an answer for why someone has AIDS or why a tornado wipes out Moore, Oklahoma.
Now, natural evil as opposed to moral evil. That's an interesting. Is all evil the same in the eyes of God? Is all sin the same in the eyes of God? Is there more sin greater than the other?
Well, I think so. Moral evil, of course, is perpetrated by personal agents. So we're not only talking about humankind. If we are theist at all theists, virtually all, believe in an evil force, an angelic forces. In fact, almost all religions of the world believe in some kind of demonic forces, that sort of thing that a lot of our movies focus on today. So we're not the only moral agents in the universe. And when God created moral agents, finite moral agents, he created them with free will, so that rather than be robots where we have to do whatever he says, or rather than be programmed to do wrong and to rebel against him, he gave that freedom that we might be truly and freely related to him. And so moral evil comes through various means, but certainly by some moral agents, all of us finally, as human beings, rejecting his godness in our lives.
As a human, I can't escape evil or sin. If I can't escape it, evil or sin, then it is inevitable evil will happen to me and I will be sinful. How do I then determine I'm a good person?
Good question. I mean, we're always culpable for our moral actions. There's no excuse, even when it's awful and the temptations, so to speak, are great. You think of Jesus in the garden. But the Bible says that the one who says he's without sin is a liar, and in fact makes God a liar. We are culpable because we do choose, whether in a very religious sense, covering it up with our outward actions, or whether in a very corrupt sense of atrocities that might be committed. But we do things that are displeasing to God, and He's the final measurement of what is good or evil. Anything contrary to who God is finally moral evil, isn't it? So how do I say I'm a good person? Well, I know in Islam, for example, people say, well, we have to be good, and God will measure us on how good we are, and we cross this bridge over the abyss into the inferno, and if we make it across, if Allah allows us into paradise, then wonderful, we've made it by how good we are. The Christian says, nobody's good enough to make it across the bridge. Nobody's good like Allah is perfect and good. God is the moral absolute. He's the supreme Lord Justice of all existence. And so how does my life measure up to that? We try, but we fail. And so we need a Savior. That's the point of Christian faith. God provided what we can't do in Christ, and His taking our punishment for our failures and resolving that impasse so that we can be forgiven and reconciled, and beyond that, made children of God. So it is by grace, not by works, in Christian faith that we are made good people. It's not our goodness, though we're now to live good. We have the Holy Spirit in us to lead us and to help us. But it is finally by God's grace that we are made acceptable, and so good in the final sense.
Professor, there is a great upheaval in the world as it relates to a religion, different types of religion, and those who are supposed to tell us what God seems to speak to a lot of people, Professor Horrell, and to some people that can be dangerous. Let me ask you, is Christianity and Islam destined to be at great odds, even at war?
Very, very good question, Barry. And of course, we have pretty much 1,500 years of conflict there. There's a yes and a no. All theists, and especially Islam, 1.6 billion people in the world. Christianity, 2.35 billion people in the world. There have surely been conflicts, and many who say they're Muslim or say they're Christian really don't act that way at all. And so, whatever that means, it is discouraging. But the greatest blasphemy of Islam, on the one side, two greatest blasphemies. One is to say God has a son. The other greatest blasphemy is to say God is Trinity. And yet those are the fundamental cornerstones of Christian faith. So in spite of believing in a personal creator and all the rest, there is that fundamental difference. Now, can we live with those differences and allow freedom? I think we can.
Wow. That we're going to come back and speak more about Islam versus Christianity here in a moment. Fascinating discussion. You can see us on the web, www.thecurtisinitiative.com, but we're going to be back in just a moment with more of the Curtis Report.
News and information, KLIF. News every morning and afternoon. More news, more stories than KRLD. News updates at least 4 times an hour, every 15 minutes. Right now, traffic on the 5s every morning and afternoon, followed by weather. With the most trusted name in North Texas, WBAP meteorologist Brad Barton. Business news updates at 20 and 50 minutes after the hour. And sports from Sports Radio 1310 The Ticket. Your commute is covered, coming and going. News and information, 570 AM, 96.3 FM, HD2, KLIF.
Do you or a family member have an alcohol or drug problem? Well, there is a solution. Solutions Outpatient Services was established 18 years ago as an alcohol and drug abuse intensive outpatient treatment program. It was founded on the belief that addiction is a disease, and because it's a disease, it can be treated. Solutions Outpatient provides their clients with an inpatient treatment process on an outpatient basis at a much lower cost and with many more benefits. Solutions Outpatient provides care that allows clients to get the treatment they need while facing the very stressors they have to learn to cope with, while providing a safe and healing environment for both clients and their families, so they can recover first from their addictions and equip themselves with the tools to maintain a lasting and comfortable recovery. There is a solution to alcohol and drug problems. Solutions Outpatient Services. Visit them online at sosdallas.com. That's sosdallas.com.
Congratulations, KLIF listeners. You are pretty special. 9 out of 10 of you are homeowners. You earn more than most. Plus, you're well educated. Now, guess what else? You're also an incredible target market for advertising. So, if you listen to KLIF and you own a business, well, you might want to advertise to great folks like you right here. To advertise on KLIF, call Jerry at 972-708-4252. That's 972-708-4252.
The Black Frame Studio in Joshua, Texas invites you to come in and take a look around. Owner and founder Joy Sanchez serves as both photographer and hairstylist. Plus, she's owned portrait studios and hair salons in various locations in Texas for years. Joy's photographic work consists mostly of fine art, abstract images, and portraiture. But don't be shy. Take a look online at joysanchezphotography.com. Contact the Black Frame Studio and Joy will help you wrap your brain around what kind of image you're looking for. The Black Frame Studio's been specializing in conceptual and fine art portrait sessions since it opened. But since then, she's also branched out and worked on commercial photography, features, and short films. The Black Frame Studio is in Joshua, Texas, but you can take a look online at joysanchezphotography.com. Joy Sanchez has the unique and perfect images you've always wanted. The Black Frame Studio, photography and hairstyling for all. Check it out online at joysanchezphotography.com.
Promoting and supporting some of the cornerstones of the American experience. It's all about family, faith, and freedom. Now, let's get back to the Curtis Report with our host, Barry Curtis.
Thanks for returning with us on this Sunday evening. Back to the Curtis Report. Fascinating discussion. I bet that there's quite a bit of discussion going on in the Curtis Report Facebook page. There always is on the great guest that we have on the show, and we've got an outstanding guest here today, and we've had this guest for the entire hour, Scott Horrell, who is the professor of theology of Dallas Theological Seminary. Fascinating discussion we're having here, and we've raised the question initially, does God exist? We've branched off on a whole host of issues. When we went to break, we were talking about Christianity and Islam. And I just censored myself. I was about to say Christianity versus Islam. But Professor Horrell, isn't it that way to a large degree?
Well, Barry, occasionally I'm in Muslim countries. I'm actually an adjunct professor in the Middle East and have lectured in Cairo, Alexandria, Dubai, other places like that. There's a lot about Islam I like, and that is parallel with Christian faith. I mean, the high morality, at least in terms of let's not exploit women, let's try to be honest, many things like that are attractive. And so when we talk about we have a common faith in a personal creator who made the universe and sustains the universe, and in a sense created it for his glory. But there's also the difference here, and that is, for the Muslim, God is one person, dogmatically one person. And when you start talking about what is one person before there's anything, what is God like if there's no earth, there's no angels, there's no humanity? How is it that he's a moral God? How is he merciful, caring, loving, all-glorious? Who's there glorifying him? A monopersonal or single-personed God, it kind of dissolves into transcendence, into abstracts, I think, when that's all you have. If you have a triune God where there is, in all eternity, real relationship, the Father is always the Father loving the Son, and the Son is always the Son loving the Father, and there's this actual indwelling in one and the other. I am in the Father is in me. These are mysteries that need to be unpacked at some other time. But there is a glory in God himself. He doesn't need to create something to glorify himself or create something to love him or to love outside of himself. And so there's a fundamental difference right at the very beginning as to how we conceive this infinite personal God. That also comes into what it means to be created in the image of God. We've talked about what it means as Christians. The Muslim does not say that humanity is created in God's image. Rather, they quite clearly say he's not, and he's not made for relationship with Allah. Allah is above all of that. He's above promises, covenants. He's above any kind of relationship with these finite, tiny human beings. God is beyond all of that. So we are created to serve him, to obey him, and that through the law of Islam.
Isn't the very nature, though, of Islam put it at odds with basic Judeo-Christian values?
Well, I'm not so sure, because you compared to atheism or many other isms out there, Judeo-Christianity and Islam are parallel on many things in terms of morality, conscience, and so forth. The conflict in part comes, and Barry, you're a strong spokesman of freedom. One of the major conflicts comes in Islam. It is theocracy. It's top-down. It is you obey Allah by obeying the Quran, by the Hadith, the secondary level of authority through the mullahs or ayatollahs or teaching sheiks or whoever else it might be. It is a top-down, you must obey. And so Sharia law is all about you must obey that law. If you convert to another religion, and Sharia law can be done away with. You can be eliminated. And in fact, a parent might have the obligation to kill their own son or daughter, as we've seen here in Dallas, because of conversion to another faith. So in some ways, there are parallels. And in other ways, whereas Christianity very much protects human freedom and choice, there are not. So there are conflicts certainly there.
And fundamentally, aren't there issues of tolerance? Is it much more likely in a Judeo-Christian society that we are principally tolerate other religions?
Oh, I take people into mosques all the time. I take classes in to visit right here in Dallas and Houston and elsewhere, of course. But recently, the leading mullah or Islamic authority for all of the Saudi Arabia nation declared that there should be no Christian church on all the Saudi Arabian peninsula. That means Dubai, Kuwait, the Emiratis, Qatar, wherever you go, no Christian church whatsoever. Already it's prohibited to proselytize or to share your faith with others. Prohibited, and many are in prison in these countries because of this.
We have just a few minutes left, but one point I want to make away. I know you're a well-traveled, well-versed person. You mentioned Cairo. There is well-documented the persecution of Coptic Christians in Egypt. Is that the outright burning of churches and horrific things to individuals? Is that and it seems to be tolerated there. Is that typical of those of the Islamic faith to allow that to happen?
I want to be careful to say typical, because there are exceptions, and most U.S. Muslims would object. But I think when we look at nations that call themselves Islamic nations. Look what's happening in Bangladesh today, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. And you go across the Muslim world, there is no room for freedom, or usually not for other churches, certainly not for new churches. Some will allow traditions that have been there for centuries to continue on.
And thus, doesn't that put us at odds?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. It is, in those countries, it is repressive. Philip Jenkins is a well-known secular historian, and he wrote a book about 5 years ago called Lost Christianities. And he talked about how Christianity spanned all the way across Asia to the Pacific Rim, Beijing, on the Ganges, in the Himalayas. There were dioceses all over the Saudi Arabian Peninsula now, in Yemen, Oman, and other places like that. And he talked about why is it that those churches have disappeared. And he said, for all the other reasons, finally, it is because of violence and persecution against the church that we see them dying out even today.
We have just a few minutes left. Professor, you've answered the question, does God exist? We know he does. What fundamentally should we know about our good God?
Well, I would argue that as a triune God, God is big enough to both be the Lord Chief Justice again, this absolutely holy one, out of whom spin, one can say, all the morality, all the right and wrong understanding of all existence, but certainly of our world. He is the measure of good. And yet we don't measure up. And so God being triune, God is big enough also to come into our world and to satisfy his own justice, his own perfection, by his taking our place, by his entering into our reality, by death paying our price so that we might live. And being triune, there's also the Holy Spirit who enters into this world and convicts us of truth and righteousness and our own unworthiness and of who Jesus is. And when we believe, then God comes into us. We are renovated. We are, the evangelical language is born again, but there's many terms in classical Christianity. God actually lives in us. So he lives in us. He has been our brother and is ascended into heaven, and God the Father is there as well. So in a sense, he's above and alongside as a once fellow human being and still with a human nature, I think. And then the Holy Spirit living within us. So God as triune is big enough to surround us with a grace that's utterly astonishing.
Wow. Fascinating discussion. This entire hour has just been absolutely remarkable. Professor Horrell, we thank you for being a part of the Curtis Report, for being a friend of the Curtis Report, and so involved with our organization here. And we talk about family, faith, and freedom. I suspect we'll be talking to you again soon. So thank you for being part of the Curtis Report. Again, you can get online here at www.curtisinitiative.com and see all about Professor Horrell. We thank you again. Does God exist? We've answered that question. He does indeed. I hear the music. It's time to go. As we always say, on the seventh day, God rested and he thought. And on the eighth day, God made radio. We'll see you next week.